Welcome to the New Discovery Christian Podcast, where you'll find Bible messaging and sermons that will encourage, uplift, and challenge you to a godlier life. Join our community and become inspired to continue living a God-directed life.
Welcome again to the New Discovery Podcast. This is our discussion on what I wish I knew in my first relationship, part 2. So we got talking, me, Parker, and Kinley, and we left off on Kinley. So we're just going to keep the conversation cooking, keep on going. So join on in with us. So the last thing that Kinley was talking about, what it really made me think about was when you specifically said, you guys didn't argue at all, and you never saw him get angry, and everyone was like, "Oh, you guys are just so perfect, and you guys are so great with each other." And I remember this. I remember one guy that I knew. I remember he came to talk to me, and some stuff was going on. And he's like, "Yeah, I'm in a relationship. It's so great. Like, we've never argued ever. Like, it's so good. Like, we've never gotten angry, any of us." And I was like. I told him, I was like, "Dude, I know you're so excited right now." And he said months and months have gone by. We're talking like 4 or 6 months. I'm like, I said, "That's a red flag, man. That's not a good thing." He's like, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Dude, if you haven't argued, what that means is that stuff is boiling below the surface with both of you or one of you, and that's going to erupt at one point, and it's going to be like Krakatoa, like it's all coming out at once, and it's not going to be pretty." And it's like, "I don't know about that, man." Yeah, they broke up 2 weeks later. So,
well, because we're human.
Yeah.
Like it's not natural for us to just suppress, let it roll off your back.
Yeah.
We're naturally really jealous, selfish people. I don't know if it's like uncommon knowledge, but especially in relationships.
Yeah.
Well, that's something our pastor always tells us is like, well, in the context of marriage, you have two sinners coming together. Like, there's gonna be conflict, there's gonna be problems because of that. Like you just said, because of our natural tendency to be jealous and angry and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, one thing that so earlier I had those rose-colored glasses, the honeymoon phase, and it was prolonged. And the one thing that I had learned is I was like, so in that relationship, by the time it was like the Krakatoa stage, I was the one that was erupting. And I was like, there's serious things that need to be solved kind of thing. And I think that's the way my mind kind of works, especially like cleaning and stuff like that with my apartment. I want to like maintain and update and make sure things are good and in my own life, just in general. So then it was being applied here. And by the time I realized it, I was like, whoa, there's a lot of backlog here. So now, to be fair to myself, I didn't just like dump a ton load of stuff all at once. I did try to take it like piece by piece kind of thing. But as soon as I got to like one piece, she was essentially like, "How dare you?" kind of thing. Like, I was like, "What?" And and even be fair to myself, I did it in like a very, this is the way I want it done to me, in a gentle type of manner. That doesn't mean you're a bad person or anything like that. I said, I'm sure there's stuff with me. So I tried to be very negotiable, but it was like, almost like, "How dare you say there was like something wrong with the relationship?" She's like, "It's perfect." Like, I think she may have even said that. And I was like, oh my gosh. I was like, I think we got a problem on our hands. Like, she did not want to work things out because she's like, "No, it's perfect." Like,
there's nothing to work out.
Yeah, there's nothing to work out. Be quiet. I'm like, and let's just say that didn't pan out very well, because my mind is like, now I'm like, whoa, I have problems and now I can't solve them. And that, let's just say that was the main reason that relationship ended, because it was like, and I probably should have, I should have been more, I don't know if threatening is the right word, but I should have been much more serious about it at that moment. And then by the time I did get serious, whether it was justified or not, I was pretty ticked off, because she had blown me off like 3 times kind of thing. And it was like some serious issues that needed to be worked out, and they just weren't being worked out. And then I think that's where like the 3 months happened, and it shouldn't have gone on that long. I knew it was done by about the second time. So, but I say all that to say, in the following relationship, I had remembered that. And I was like, how do I integrate that into the relationship? Like clear cut kind of thing, and not just have the rose colored lenses and just bumble through. And then when there's problems, it'll just be a nuclear explosion to be taken care of. And like, you know, if there's a nuclear explosion, there may be no coming back kind of deal. I mean, it just may be complete devastation and you can't rebuild because it's so much destruction. So I think one of the wisest things I think that I've tried to implement was, and I told her specifically, was one day out of the week, at least set aside about more than an hour of time to try to discuss like stuff in the relationship that needs to be like worked through. Like, is there something that you're irritated about with me, or me vice versa with you? Like something that can't be let go. Is there something you need to tell me that's going on in your life or your relationship with your family, your school, or where you're going in life? Is it not aligning? Do we need to work that out, kind of thing? And I have to say that was one of the wisest things starting off the relationship was with, there was other things too, but in this discussion, that was super critical, because if there ever was an issue, it would always have been brought up. Now, there were certain things that may have just been brought up in passing, if that makes sense, and then you work it out. But there's some things where in the moment, you just may not bring it up. And that maybe it's not because of you. Maybe it's because of the context. Maybe it is because of you and you didn't bring it up because of fear or something. Like that left a moment for both of us to know. It's like, oh, whoa, whoa, whoa. And I think it was like on the weekend or something like that. And generally kind of done with school and stuff like that. And we had more time. And it was like, then we worked it all out and we left that time. And she would specifically ask me, or I would specifically ask her, and she'd be like, whether or not there was something on my mind or her mind, we would still ask it anyways. Is there anything we need to discuss about like what's going on? And we both knew what that meant when we brought up like and said it like that. And sometimes there was nothing I would bring up, and sometimes there's nothing she would bring up, and everything's cool. Like there is nothing.
But it's just kind of like a little check-in. Like,
right.
Hey, is there something that like needs to be like cleared up or whatever?
Yeah, or addressed.
Just so it doesn't fester under the surface, like you said.
And sometimes there's a book that I'm reading right now, and I love the book. And one thing that he discusses is this, and he specifically said it needs to be 90 minutes at least at a minimum. That's what he says, because if you don't, he says everyone has a story to their life, and you need to update your story and theirs. And he is specifically talking about marriage so leave that in context. But I think we all know that we're testing this person out possibly are they compatible for that at one point? I mean, that's kind of why you're dating, I hope, at least. As a Christian, I hope that's what you're doing. And so he says 90 minutes at least to update your story with their story. And since you're in a relationship, there's kind of, you're both your stories. Like you need to update that. And is it compatible or is it not compatible? And he says by doing that, you're together kind of thing, and you're making sure you're heading on the same road kind of thing. And he said, if you're not, problems will very easily crop up and create some serious problems. So and this is before I read that book. I'm reading it right now, but I can initially think about it because one thing he brings up is he says it's not the vacations, it's not the weekend retreats, it's not the summer trips or winter trips or going off to Disneyland kind of stuff to discuss. He said the biggest things are like little things, honestly, and working that out. And now again, he's talking about marriage, and he brings up stuff like who does household chores, who makes the bed, how is it made?
Thinking of,
yeah,
it's like that's so little, but like who's gonna take out the trash?
Right.
Who does the dishes?
Yeah.
Because I don't do the dishes.
See, and do you want to do them? Does the other person want to do them? Are there certain things that you want to do, but maybe you're not as good as the other person wants it to be? Maybe you're more of a clean person and they're not much of a clean person, but you want to do a chore, but they may not do as effectively as you want. He's like, you have to work that out because there'll be so many. And he says everything that I discussed is like two things. There's a multitude of things. And then if you get into kids and stuff like that, but that still applies to a dating relationship too. With certain things are going on, like in deciding on where you're going to go eat and stuff like that, or how you decide that, where you're going to go, how much time, what day are you going to go on a date. So just think of like that. And it's like you're trying to work things out, but those little things do matter because you have two separate lives and things that are going on, and you need to be aligned. Because I brought up on this podcast where I had a job and an internship at the church, and I had a full-time job somewhere else, and vice versa. And this isn't to throw shade on her by any means, but she wasn't going to school, wasn't going to work, and there became a big problem where there was a projecting
thing.
Yes. And there was a projecting of I had the same amount of time as her, assuming, and to be fair, everyone makes assumptions about everyone else, and we assume they think the way we think. We assume they think and know what we know, and that's another thing to work out. And that became a big issue because we were coming from way opposite polar. Like I'm 80 hours of work of week with all this stuff, and she's like 0. It's like way more time on your hands, almost nothing on my hands. Like to just do even a phone call was like, oh my gosh, was a sacrifice for me at that moment. It wouldn't be as much now, but that was a humongous sacrifice for one everyday phone call kind of thing. So I've already told that story if you want to watch in a previous podcast, but that became a humongous issue just with phone calls and times and stuff like that. And eventually I had to put my foot down and be like, to me, this is becoming controlling. Whereas from her perspective, it may not have been. So, and I guess that's the thing is that you got to be aligned on these things because is someone overpowering the other person and it's a controlling, does it come across manipulative, tyrannical kind of thing? Whereas maybe in a different context, it would not be. But right now it is though. And so it's like you got to discuss and negotiate that to make this work in this relationship right now between two different people and making that work. And that's one thing that I had realized that by doing that, it really made it work out a whole lot better because we did argue. And there were other things I did too, which I discussed is I'm fine with discussing and all that kind of stuff. But I did lay out a couple other things too, because the last relationship, by the time that came out and all the problems there was a lot of disrespect that came my way, name calling and stuff like that. And eventually that's where if there's name calling and disrespect, that's one of the things that gets me upset, and that's one thing that ticks me off. There's not a lot of things that tick me off, but that definitely ticks me off, and that was where the gloves kind of came off, and I'm like, no, you're not going to do that. I'm saying that very lightly of what happened, but eventually that came up in the other relationship, and I was like, I'm fine when negotiating, and I know it's going to get a little heated kind of thing, and everyone's not going to be comfortable in here. But there will be no name calling. You're not going to call me names. We're going to run into problems real quick if that's the way it's going to go down, because something isn't going to be solved. Another problem is going to crop up. And to be fair to her, she almost didn't really do anything like that. And when she did, I think I just I'm going to hang up. I'm going to call later. Let you settle down a little bit because you're not going to talk to me like that. And sometimes that didn't happen later that day. It happened days later. But again, that was another thing that was worked out though, and trying to negotiate kind of deal. And I'm glad that I took the stands that I had done, because for me, I'm not going to be called names. I'm not going to be called stupid or foolish or retarded or something like that. Now, if it's in like a funny manner, that's one thing, but like not in a serious manner. I'm not, that's childish, and I'm not going to have anything to do with it. So, for me, that was pretty critical in this area, and getting that nailed out. And then so that the future ones will also have that and just build off of that foundation kind of thing. So, yeah.
Well, I really like what you just said. Talking about how when these things did come up, there was a lot of this name calling and a lot of provocation, I guess you could call it. But in 1 Corinthians 13:5, so this is the second half of the verse. And this once again is the love chapter, as it's famously known. But it says that love is not provoked and does not take into account a wrong suffered. So I think, when because those conversations have to be had, obviously, or it's just gonna just blow up. But when somebody does bring it up, and this is extremely difficult to do. I'm not saying this is easy because it's not. But it is important for us because we can't control how the other person reacts, right? But we can control how we react.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it is very important for us to kind of, I guess, absorb the blow initially. And I'm not saying you just sit there and just take it. That's not what I'm saying. But kind of as Jesus did, it's like, well, just, let them get it out, and then we'll discuss it, because it literally says, like, does not take into account a wrong suffered. So I think one thing in my just in my experience that has helped is just to let the other person just put their emotions out there, like, just listen, right? Don't critique, don't comment. Just let them get it out there, and then just gently and easily, work through it. Which, like I said, is extremely difficult because you're
Right.
going to be emotional too, and you're going to want to lash out.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that comes from just, prayer and reading the Bible, right? So developing your traits into those that Jesus had, because this is, I mean, what did we do to Christ? Like when he was on the cross, like the Romans, they mocked him, they tore his clothes, they gambled for him. But what does he say? He's like, well, Father, please forgive them because they don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
So I think that, for me personally, it's important to let the other person, get that out. And also from my perspective, not to just blow up on somebody, because I think it's easy to, like, let things boil over, and then there's a minor thing that comes up, but yet, like, to the other person, it's like, well, you shouldn't be getting mad about this. This is a small thing, but it's not the small thing that sets you off. It's the whole. It's what was the saying? It's the straw that broke the camel's back. And I think, like you said, being willing to have those conversations up front helps to kind of diminish that. But another thing that y'all have both mentioned is, or I think both of y'all mentioned this. I know, Kyle, you mentioned this. You're talking about, like, dating is kind of this test for marriage. And I just want to say kind of two things on that. From a Christian perspective, the same rules that apply to a married couple don't apply to a Christian couple. So, and this is just kind of
Yeah. This is
you'll
a good
see all
point.
this
I
in
thought about-
Ephesians 5.
Yeah.
Where it talks about, wives being subject to their husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is also the head of the church. And then he goes on to say, husbands, love your wives just as Christ also loved the church. And he gave himself up for her. It's like the idea is, like, the husband is the leader of the household, and is responsible to help. And that's not to say that the wife isn't, like, obviously she can develop her own spiritual disciplines as well, but it is the husband is supposed to be the leader, having the Bible studies, making an effort to get to church and all those things. But in a dating relationship, that's not the case, right? So I'm assuming most of this is probably going to be teenagers that this applies to. But ideally, and this is the very next chapter, in chapter 6, your what's the word I'm looking for? Your person that develops you spiritually should be your parents in an ideal situation. Now, obviously, there's broken homes, and that's another discussion. But it's not the person you're dating, okay, if that makes sense. And the reason I bring that up is to get into the second point, is just because two people are Christian and they're good people doesn't mean that they're always going to be compatible, right? Like, just because you're good friends doesn't mean it's going to work out in a relationship. And I
Exactly.
think, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I meant, like, exactly. That's what I was talking
Yeah.
about earlier.
So, and I think with that in mind, because we're testing to see if this is good for marriage, and because not everybody there can be great for friends, but not necessarily compatible in the context of marriage, that means there shouldn't, and obviously there's emotions involved, and you want to be as gracious as you can. But ending a relationship isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah.
Because once both parties realize that this is not going to work, I can't really give a good argument for why you should stay together in the context of a relationship. Now, hopefully you can still stay friends. And I think just from personal experience, I think you need to separate yourself for a time.
Yeah.
Until
that's not always gonna
because you're
happen.
not right. And I think afterwards, after that time has passed, I think both people can then come together, and, the relationship's going to be different because there's, that happened in the past. but I think you can still be friends to an extent. But the main point that I'm trying to get at is once you realize that that relationship's not going to work out, like, don't feel bad for ending it. As long as it's, the main thing is don't go off and like cheat on them, right? Like, be completely honest with them. Because, and I like and this goes back to what you were saying about the difficult conversations. And I don't know where I heard this. This is not original to me, but I think I may have heard this from you actually. But when we're not willing to have those difficult conversations, what that means is we love our comfort more than the other person's well-being, because it's much easier for us to just kind of, push it under the rug.
I know we've had these conversations before about this.
Much easier for us to just kind of ignore it and, sweep it under the rug. But it's much more damaging to the other person, because now they're getting led on, which is a terrible thing to do. Don't do it. If you see it coming and can prevent it. Now, sometimes it happens accidentally, and that happens. But I think it's much more loving to be upfront with somebody, and I think there's actually a proverb now that it's. I'm just gonna check real quick. If it's not there, I'm moving on. But I think it's like Proverbs 24 that kind of ties into this a little bit. Sorry, this is just off the dome.
Sometimes you got to go off the dome. Sometimes, Parker.
Yeah,
go for it.
But no, it's not 24. Maybe it's 26. Maybe it's 27. So it says, and this is similar. I don't want to take it out of context, but I think it kind of ties into what we're talking about. But chapter 27, verse 5 says, "Better is open rebuke than love that is concealed." And assuming that I'm understanding what they're saying, I think the idea is that this. I know there's another area of Proverbs where it talks about the wounds of a friend is better than the kisses of an enemy. But I think the idea is that it's much better to, have those conversations, even though there's going to be some conflict. It's much better to be to get it out there rather than to conceal it. And I'm just the final thing, and then I'm going to shut up. I like what Jordan Peterson said on I forget, I don't know where this was. I just saw it on Facebook, but he said conflict, maybe you know this, conflict delayed or ignored, or so. I think it's delayed. I think conflict delayed is conflict multiplied, is the way he worded it. And the idea being is, you can kick it down the road if you want, but the further you kick it, the more dust and more problems that it's going to accrue. So
that's a really good point. I think there's I don't remember. I don't know if it was in the book. I think it was one of the books that I had read. It may be the same one. And he uses an example about two married couple. And so I think this is maybe a good explanation of what I mean by little things, because they do matter. Little things become big things eventually. And so he discussed how a husband and a wife, and they're living with each other, and I don't know if it was a new place or whatever it was, but in their context, I don't remember if this. I think he came home for lunch. He could do that with his job, and she would make him lunch. I think that was the setup, I think, here, and then they would have lunch as a family kind of deal. I think that's the way that he set up this story. And so for years and years, she's cooking the breakfast, and she sets it out, and then he eats it. And so he puts this in the story, though, is that they're eating off of something. It's like not a real plate or something like that. It's like, I don't know if you guys have seen sometimes that decorative stuff. Sometimes people set out and they put things in it and on top of it. So I don't know. I guess could use the imagination a little bit what that looks like. But they're not like real plates, and they're like really small, or they're like, I think what they said, it was like the tea saucers. You know what I'm talking about? They're like really small that you put your tea on. So it's like a really small plate. Do you know what I'm talking about, Parker?
I think I know what you're talking about.
Okay, you look kind of confused.
Like
yeah, I think I know what you're talking about.
I'll try to make sure I got
not
you
like
on
a
that.
coaster, but like just what the little teacups sit on, like the little miniature plate.
Yeah, very small. So I think, I think that's what it is. And so I knew something was like weird like that.
It's a saucer.
Yeah, a
Sorry.
saucer. That's what
That
it
was-
is. Yeah.
that was
Yeah.
bothering
We
me.
needed a name here. I was saying like plate thingy decorative. So a saucer. They were using saucers.
Mini tea coaster.
Yeah. Jeez. Coming up with like names and definitions here. So saucer. They were eating saucers for like breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And so this has been happening for years. But no, there have been no discussion on this though. And so it was just kind of like, yeah, we eat on saucers. And so he said one day so other stuff was going on with work and stuff like that. But one day she said he just banged on the table and was like, I hate that we're using saucers. Like, are we poor? Like, this is stupid. Like, what are we doing? Like, this is like low class. Like, just like out of nowhere, and said, freaked her out kind of thing. It's like, what the heck? Like, where did that come from? It's like bang on the table. It's like, we've been doing this for years kind of thing. But then he didn't say anything else. And then later on they discussed it and he was like, well, something else was really going on with work and stuff like that. That's really why I was upset. But they later worked it out that he really did have an issue with eating on the saucers. And like that came out of emotions from something else and eventually, Jordan Peterson, he's a psychologist, he takes people in, he counsels them like families, individuals. And he says, believe it or not, this is what I have to deal with more in my counseling sessions and stuff like that than when we go on vacations and all that kind of stuff. Do we date and stuff like that and marry? He said, this is really the stuff that I deal with more and become humongous issues. He said finance as well, but these things accrue into giant problems. And it's like, where did that come from? And he says in that family now they work through it, but it's always a funny thing when something comes up and it's like, is this a saucer kind of thing? He says they always kind of laugh about it now, but it seems so ridiculous because I think he taught about this to his class. He says it sounds ridiculous, but this is legitimately a problem here and something that hadn't been worked out. And he said, how many things does this also affect that this little thing is not being taken care of? Does that affect the romance? Does that affect wanting to spend time with each other? Does that affect wanting to care for that person or get them gifts? Like, is that seething under the surface about a freaking saucer kind of thing? And you don't do those things. It's like, how about we take care of that so then you can get to these things? Because one thing he actually read a couple of days ago, he said, maybe this is why I came up with the idea for this topic, but he said, you can't have romance unless you have peace. He says, if you don't have peace, you can't have romance. So he says, as soon as married couple come in, dating, whatever, we can apply this. If there isn't peace, there is no romance. And so that has got to be worked out, those little things, because they'll turn into a saucer kind of deal. And he said, thankfully it was worked out. And it only took a couple years. It wasn't 50, 60 years, and it wasn't taken care of and became a giant issue. But he says these things can become a 50, 60-year never taken care of. And it's like, why are you just now bringing this up? And it's been 40 years kind of thing. And then at one point it's like, yeah, it has been 40 years. So now it's kind of my fault, but there is a problem. And so, it can just become a bigger issue than it needs to be kind of thing. But I always kind of remember that don't create saucer issues. So
All that from a saucer.
all that from a little saucer, teacup saucer. So, yeah. But you guys got anything else?
McKinley, you got anything? I was just gonna make one final comment.
Yeah, me and Parker.
Unless you got. Yeah, well, I really like.
Make sure you got an opportunity here.
Yeah, so I don't want to jump in, but I really like what you just said. The final thing you said, you can't have peace without, or I'm sorry, you can't have romance without peace. That was what you.
Yeah,
Okay.
Something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, what I like. So then, how do we find?
enough.
Do what?
Yeah, it's like you black days. I don't know.
Yeah.
Probably.
Sorry,
I don't
Maybe.
the coffee's running dry.
Yeah, it's running dry, man.
Okay, but what I was gonna say. So then the question is, well, then how do we have peace, right? So how do we get this peace? Assuming that that's true, because it seems legit. How do we get that peace and then carry that into our relationships? And I think obviously that comes through Christ, right? Like what Paul says in Philippians 4 is, he says, rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice. And this is with an exclamation point. I know I'm not like kind of monotone. I don't yell, but Paul's like yelling here.
Yeah.
Because this is a great thing. He says, let your forbearing spirit be known to all men. The Lord is near. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And this is kind of the main point. He says, and the peace of God, which surpasses all comprehension, shall guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. So obviously, I think that peace, and at the foundation of every relationship, like you have to have a relationship with God, which comes through, our, repentance from our sin and the wrong we do. And by trusting in Christ, right, we receive that Holy Spirit, that salvation, and ultimately that peace with God, which then translates into our relationships and helps us not only gives us the wisdom and, who to have a relationship with, but also when conflict arises, it gives us the patience and the endurance to, go through those conflicts and work them out with others. So
The last two things I could think on my mind that you had brought up that are kind of coming back to me, as I guess the coffee's coming back to me kind of deal, is you brought up love, and you brought up kind of commitment. I'm going to say the word commitment. That's what came up in my mind. And one thing is just because you date someone doesn't always mean that you may be in love with that person, and that love may be there. You may like that person, you may really like that person, but you may not love that person. Because I'm not sure from the past, if I'm quite honest, if anyone in the past that I have loved, that may sound bad to some people, but I know I have liked people I've dated in the past, and some really, really liked. But I'm not sure if love, at least in the definition of the Bible, at least, I'm using that definition, not just like feelings and stuff like that. I mean, I've had feelings and stuff like that, but like, have I been, I guess here's what someone asked me one time when it comes to, and I'm using kind of this as love and kind of a principle from the Bible. Can you not imagine yourself continuing life without this person? That's what they said when you're deciding if you want to marry this person. Can you just not imagine continuing going on without them? Like, they need to be there. We need to continue on. And you can never imagine this person with someone else. That has not happened. So there's that. And then, so you got that going on. And then also, is this person someone who you want to continue life with this person and make one life out of them? Like, are they completely compatible with you in like a team kind of effort? And this is the way he described it. He said, are you guys going in the same direction? That's how he put it. He said, are you guys, your direction in life and their direction in life, you're heading towards the same point here and the same movement? And that has not happened either. We're not heading in the right direction. We're going in different directions. And then it came to a point you're forcing it. And so that's the way it's always been. And when it came to that point for me, then that's when I always typically knew it needs to end, because we're not going in the same places. And it's not the same direction kind of deal. It's like forcing it, making it work. And it's like, no, that doesn't work. And so knowing that as well. And then I think there's another one, that he had mentioned. I know there was those two for sure. You're heading the same direction. And there was another one maybe. But I'll say at least with those two, just I know that those for sure he ended up mentioning. Like, there's a level of commitment that's going on with that, I think. And it's like, you want to make that commitment because you're heading in the same direction. You're compatible with each other, and you can't imagine this person not being with you. And I would say in the definition of love, I'd say that's how God, in a lot of ways, loves us, is that we're heading in the same direction. We want to go in your direction, God. And God's like, I'm always going to be with you. And, I've done what I've done and made sacrifices to make that happen. And I would say that type of covenant, type of commitment is, I would say, definition by love how God loves us, that needs to be in a relationship. That same covenant, we still use that same word when you get married. And if that's not there, don't force something that needs to happen, kind of like what you were saying, Parker, that, that isn't going to work. Don't force it to make it work, kind of deal. And also when it comes to the commitment side of things that you were bringing up is you're dating, you're not married. That's a great point. Someone had asked me, a girl asked me some time ago of what's your level of commitment to a person? And so I was it's a little vague, but the way I took it was being committed to someone is, if you're definitely not dating someone, you have no commitment to that person and in that arena. So I just kind of mentioned that because is a bit vague. So I brought that up. If you like different people, like, you're not committed to any of those people if you're not dating them, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So there's that. And then if you're dating someone, you have at least the commitment level, I would say, to you're not going to cheat outside the relationship. I would say that's implicit. If you guys have at least said, hey, if it's serious, I've talked to certain girls and dated them before it was a commitment. I don't think that's wrong as long as you're open about that, I think. And I've done that and been open about it. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But as soon as you say it's me and you, then that's when it's like there doesn't need to be a third string kind of deal. At that point, then that commitment level is, you said it's me and you, at least until we end this. And so I tell people when they're dating like that, don't act like you're married, though. At the same time, be open. If you want to end it, you can end it. Don't go behind someone's back and do some other dingling things or whatever. It's like, be open. If you want to end it, end it. You have that much of commitment to that person. And then when you're married, you essentially say, outside of adultery, like, I'm going to stick with you. That's the biblical version. Whether or not whatever culture says, and that's very serious. Because if anyone else may say, well, if I don't like them, I'm not happy, is God always happy with you? That's what I would say. And I would say absolutely not. He's not always happy with you. I doubt he's always happy with me. And there's a lot he's got to put up with. That's the biblical version of that commitment. Now, if you're not a Christian, I'm not telling you to live a Christian commitment level of your marriage. I would say it's reflection of true love, I would say, but that's what the Bible says of the level of commitment. We're supposed to have that person. So, and then I would say, well, what happens to the wrong person? There's two things I would say there. One is definitely know that you know who you're getting into. I would say that's a wise thing to do, because there's some people who's like, oh yeah, we dated for 3 months and we got married. I'm not saying you're wrong by doing that, but I've known people who've done that and then they said they became a different person. And why I mentioned earlier, and there's probably part one, is getting to know when they're angry, when they're sad, they're disappointed, when they're disappointed in you, their dreams fail, is you know who the real person is. The rose-colored glasses come off, and you know what you're dealing with this person when you tackle all those things. And then you at least have a great idea of what you're going to get into, because one person said, there's your dating, and then when you get married, that's amplified by 8 times. Okay, you need to know what is amplified by 8 times when you get into a marriage and what you're dealing with and what you're not. And I would say that's very wise to do. And then the second one is people change over time, and that's going to happen in a marriage. And I would say there's wise things to be aligned with this person, but there's difficulties of mistakes, and sins can get involved, and kids and disasters and tragedies. But I would say that happens with you too, and you want God not to give up on you as well when you're down and when you're not into God. I don't know how to put it. And do you want God just to leave you when you're not into Him and never reach out again? And just, I don't think so. I think we would want that, and we're supposed to be images of God, so we're supposed to be reflecting Him, and that's a covenant. And I think the thing is a lot of people in 50% divorce rate right now. What you see people not reflecting that God love, that God commitment, that those vows. And like I was reading in Psalms today, it talks about how God remembers His covenant, remembers His vows, remembers the promises that He gave to Israel. And it's in the context of Israel turning away from God and not following Him and getting into adultery and idolatry, and they're turning their hearts away from Him, but God keeps reaching out to them. And He says, and that's the type of commitment that you're getting into. So when you say those vows and that's what's going on there. That's so serious. And, people get wrapped up into the music and the dress or the tuxedo and wherever it is. And some people blow $30,000. I'm not saying that's wrong necessarily, but you can get focused on all that. It's like, whoa, what are you saying before God right now? That's a big deal what you're saying. Because God even says in Proverbs or Psalms, keep your vow even when it hurts. And I love that scripture, because God keeps his vow and his covenant even when it hurts for him. And I think that's what you're getting into. So know what you're getting into. I think that's the deal. You're not diving into a deal where I'm always going to be happy, because God has had ups and downs with me. I know about that, but we've stuck faithful, committed with each other, and we keep going, because he's had some rough times with me, and I'm sure I'm not the only person. So that should be said too, is in knowing and dating, but especially as you're thinking about marriage, keep that in mind too in the first one.
Yeah.
Anything else you guys got? Or
you just brought back. I know we're. I want to be concise, because you said so many great things there. But just real quick, why are we drawing this distinction between dating and marriage, right? Because isn't dating just the free trial? Like, that's kind of the way the culture looks at it. And it's not, because I like what you're talking about with love, right? It's like we're trying to nail down a definition, but it's kind of, the reason it's kind of hard to say, well, what exactly is love is because there's 4 different types of love, right? Like, you have the love that a parent has for a child. You have the love, or like family members will say, you have obviously the romantic love, and you have the love that friends have, which most people know. But then you also have the self-sacrificing love, which is the love that God has for us. So with dating relationships, typically there's usually the romantic and the friendship. That's usually it. Okay, but marriage is the only place where all 4 types of love are present, because you have the husband and the wife that are sacrificing the things they enjoy for the betterment of either one another or their children. So there's the self-sacrificing. Obviously, the romantic love is there between the husband and wife. You have the friendship, because the idea is that you're a team, you're one unit, that is living out God's word and living in this world. So you have that dynamic going, and then of course you have the love that a parent has for a child, right? So because it's it's a family. If you have kids, now not everybody has kids. So with that in mind, why do Christians put this high value on marriage? Is because it's the only thing. One, it's the only thing that possesses the full idea of love. But 2, is what you pointed out, is it's a reflection of God's love for us, right? So when the husband is willing to die for his wife, to protect her and to keep that relationship going strong, what did God do for the church, or what did Christ do for the church? Like, he died for her so that relationship could be, one, so that, if you're not a Christian, so that relationship could begin, because, the Bible says that we're enemies of God when we come into the world, but thankfully he offers us very, generous terms of surrender, and by turning to him for forgiveness, he adopts us into, his family, which is, once again, there's that, that dynamic of the child and the parent. So long story short, and then of course you have the relationship between Christ and the church. But all that to say this, the reason that marriage is so important and why it's, so important to consider these things, especially starting out with your first relationship, is because you want to get the marriage right. And I like what you said about, well, what if you marry the wrong person? You didn't. If you marry the person that you married is the right person, okay? Because, and the reason I say that, and this is going to have to be another podcast because time's running short.
Yeah, those other things.
Go to 1 Corinthians. I think it's 1 Corinthians 7. It could be 2 Corinthians 7. You can Google it. I'm sure it'll pop up. But Paul talks about, the rules of marriage. And long story short, like, it is an effort where it takes 2 people to work at it. And, you have to build at it. And I like what one couple said to my pastor and his wife. They asked them how long they were married. And the couple that they were talking to said, well, we've been married, we've had 2 great years, but 22 hard years. And the point is, it's like we've said earlier, it's like, yeah, you have that honeymoon phase, but it is, it is an effort. It takes work. But I would argue only through knowing Christ and, having his Holy Spirit, we can have the wisdom to work on it and develop it and make it into what God originally intended it to be.
Great. Yeah. I got a million things that just spawn back in my brain.
We can do a
but
part 3.
Yeah. But we're going to end it right here. So thank you for joining in with part 1, part 2. We're probably going to end up having a part 3 at one point with this, because I got a bunch more stuff that just came up with just what Parker just said right there. And other things that Kinley had said as well. So, but I'm going to end it right here because we'll be doing another episode. So not today, though. So thank you for jumping in with this topic today. Hopefully you guys got something out of this from this topic. If you guys can think of any other topics, put that in the comments. You have any other comments that for us to think about, you can put that in the comments. But thank you for joining in with us. Give us a like and subscribe if you do like us, so we can continue doing the work that we're doing. But we'll jump in and we'll see you on the next one.